You wake up lying flat on your back in a sun-scorched field, blinking slowly at a sky that seems a bit too blue and birds that chirp just a little too loudly. You sit up. There are no familiar sounds, no distant rumble of traffic, no buzz of a phone in your pocket, no faint hum of city power lines. There is, however, an odd and earthy smell lingering in the air. Something like sheep or maybe unwashed socks. You glance around and realize, with a dull sinking feeling, that you are not where you were 5 minutes ago. There is no coffee shop, no paved road, just a dirt path, a few olive trees, and someone in a tunic walking by with a basket of fish balanced on their head. You instinctively reach for your phone, only to discover that it's not in your pocket. In fact, your jeans are gone. Instead, you appear to be wearing something vaguely reminiscent of a linen sack with a belt tied around it. A toga, maybe. Or a tunic. Either way, it's itchy and doesn't have pockets. Panic rises, but only a little. Your brain is too confused to commit fully. This must be a dream. Or maybe an interactive exhibit at a museum you drunkenly wandered into. A historical reenactment gone a little too far. But then, reality hits. A man pushing a cart full of amphorae grumbles at you, in a language that sounds suspiciously like Latin. Classical Latin, not the churchy kind you heard in old movies, but the kind that's fast, fluid, and utterly incomprehensible. You blink at him, and he mutters something that you're fairly certain is not a compliment. He moves on, leaving behind the rich stench of fermented fish sauce. So you sit there, blinking in the sunlight, coming to terms with a few facts. First, this is not a theme park. Second, these aren't actors. And third, you're in ancient Rome. Not metaphorically, not in spirit, actually, literally. Somehow, in some way, you have time traveled about 2,000 years back in time. And you have no idea how to get back. After a long moment of stunned silence, your modern brain does what it's been trained to do. It starts running diagnostics. What do you know about ancient Rome? What can you remember from school? Julius Caesar, senators in sandals, aqueducts, gladiators. Something about the Colosseum and vomitoriums, though you're pretty sure that last one is a myth. You scan your surroundings and see tiled rooftops in the distance, small figures bustling through stone archways, smoke spiraling into the sky. You spot a temple of some kind, grand and white and buzzing with activity. A donkey stares at you. You decide to stand up, brushing off the dry grass clinging to your ridiculous outfit. Your bare feet ache instantly on the rocky path. So that's what walking feels like without shoes. Every step is a reminder that the modern world, with all its comforts, is very far away. You try to walk with purpose, heading vaguely toward what looks like a village, or maybe the edge of Rome itself. You pass a man urinating against a stone wall. No one seems to care. Modesty isn't really a concept here. A child runs past you carrying a loaf of bread, the size of a small dog. A woman nearby is yelling something from her balcony while dumping a basin of water into the street. Or at least you hope it's water. You hug the side of a building, not yet ready to experience the Roman sewer system firsthand. As you wander deeper into the city, people start to stare. Not because you're dressed oddly, you've seen 5 people in nothing but loincloths, but because your face, your posture, your aura, they all scream outsider. You hold yourself like someone who grew up with ergonomic chairs and dental floss. That makes you suspicious. You pass a small stall where a man is selling fried mice on sticks. Your stomach churns. The man offers you one. You wave it away, but he doesn't take offense. He just yells something at the top of his lungs, laughing. You assume it's an insult, but it could also just be aggressive marketing. Eventually, you stumble into a courtyard with a fountain at the center. It's old and chipped, but still flowing with clear water, an aqueduct-fed marvel of engineering. You sit beside it, overwhelmed. The sensory input is too much: smells, sounds, sights, and a relentless sun that doesn't care that you've skipped sunscreen. You sip the water and are immediately unsure if that was wise. There's no chlorine, no filtration. Just hope. You're not sure, How long you sit there before a group of kids gather nearby, staring at you. One of them cautiously approaches and pokes your tunic with a stick. You look up. The child says something and points at your wrist. You glance down. Somehow, your digital watch is still on. And it's blinking. 13:06. Your last connection to home. You tap it instinctively. Nothing happens. One of the kids screams and runs. Another laughs. You're now the village weirdo. You close your eyes and take a deep breath. Okay. You are in ancient Rome. You know a few things. You have a brain full of modern knowledge, an itchy tunic, and, somewhere deep down, a stubborn will to survive. Maybe, just maybe, you can make this work. Or at least not die in the next 24 hours. And with that, your accidental Roman life begins. There are things in life you never think you'll miss until they're gone. Like filtered air. Or Febreze. Or simply not being constantly surrounded by the lingering scent of humanity at its sweatiest, most fermented, and least hygienic. The moment you step further into the city, you are hit, violently and unapologetically, by the full bouquet of ancient Rome. It's a complicated smell. Not just bad. Bad would be too easy. No, this is a layered, nuanced, and utterly unforgettable olfactory symphony of human ambition without plumbing. You catch notes of sweat baked into wool, roasted meat being prepared on open fires, manure from horses and oxen, and the unmistakable ammonia-rich sting of urine. Somewhere under that is the cloying sweetness of cheap perfume, possibly made with rancid olive oil, and whatever remains of yesterday's fish market. You had read that ancient cities were dirty. But reading something in a textbook and inhaling it directly into your lungs are very different experiences. Rome doesn't just smell, it clings. The air itself feels greasy. It slides down your throat and coats your insides like warm soup. A thick, living fog of humanity's leftovers. You instinctively cover your nose, but people look at you strangely. No one else is flinching. They are used to this. This is Tuesday. You try to focus on anything else, sights, sounds, patterns of the city, but it's no use. The smell becomes a constant companion. At first, it's distracting. Then nauseating. Then, slowly, your brain gives up and files it under normal. The human body is remarkably adaptable. Which is the only reason you don't faint in the first hour. A woman walks past you, with a basket of something you hope is bread, but smells faintly like wet dog. Behind her, a child vomits in a gutter. No one reacts. No one cleans it. The vomit stays. You realize there's a reason Roman sandals were so thick. The street itself doesn't help. It's stone, uneven, and full of mysterious damp patches. Gutters run down the middle of most roads. But their job is less about sanitation and more about making sure the filth flows somewhere else. Occasionally, you spot someone emptying a chamber pot out a window. One splashes alarmingly close to your foot. Again, no one reacts. This, apparently, is just how things are. Public sanitation exists, but it's not what you hope. Rome has sewers, famous ones, even. But you quickly discover they were more symbolic than effective. The Cloaca Maxima, the city's great sewer, carries waste from certain areas, but much of the city just dumps refuse into alleys, where it festers. And then there's garum. You didn't expect fish sauce to be a major part of your sensory assault, but here it is. Garum is everywhere. In food. On counters. On people's hands. Garum is made by fermenting fish guts in the sun for months. You can smell it in every market stall, clinging to wooden bowls and dribbling down clay jars. It's beloved by Romans and despised by your stomach. You lean against a wall and try to breathe through your mouth. But even that doesn't help. The taste of the city is in the air. Metallic, sour, vaguely fecal. Your modern immune system begins to take stock. How many microbes have you inhaled? How long before you catch something that hasn't existed for centuries? You start mentally calculating the distance to the nearest pharmacy before remembering they haven't been invented yet. You pass a public latrine. At first, you don't realize what it is. It just looks like a row of stone benches with holes. Until you see someone casually sit down, chat with a neighbor, and relieve himself while maintaining eye contact. There are no privacy walls. No doors. Just communal toilets and a shared sponge on a stick soaked in vinegar water. You make a mental note to never, under any circumstances, use the facilities. The scent gets worse near food markets. You assumed food might offer some comfort, a break from the constant attack. But ancient food storage is not gentle. Meat hangs unrefrigerated in the open air. Flies gather in clouds. Fish sit on wooden slabs in the heat, turning slowly into something that might qualify as aged, if you're being charitable. You spot a stand selling boiled pig's feet, another offering blood sausage, and a third enthusiastically hawking pickled dormice. You've never wanted a granola bar more in your life. You try to take solace in nature. Perhaps the countryside will smell better. But even the air there is thick with animals, compost, and wood smoke. Your only hope is elevation, a breeze from a hilltop far away from the crowded streets. But you can't just climb out of Rome. You're here now. And your nose has to adapt. Eventually, you begin to understand how the Romans managed it. They didn't notice it because they didn't have anything to compare it to. To them, this was the smell of life, of commerce, celebration, politics, and religion. Temples smelled like goats and incense. The Senate smelled like dust, sweat, and ink. Everything had a scent, and that scent told you what was happening, where you were, and who was in charge. You start to think of it that way. Less gross, more historic. You imagine historians bottled it, Ode to Roma. 1 part sewage, 2 parts ambition. You chuckle to yourself. The child next to you offers you something on a stick. It smells like burned honey and vinegar. You take a bite. It's not the worst thing you've tasted today. Maybe you're adapting. By nightfall, the city changes again. Smoke rises from small fires. The scent shifts, more burning wood, fewer open markets. But the core of it remains, the breath of millions living close, working, sweating, cooking, relieving themselves, all within walking distance. You inhale deeply, more out of surrender than acceptance. This is home now. Tomorrow, maybe, you'll find clean air. But tonight, you sleep with the scent of the empire curling around you, like a warm, rancid blanket. You always knew fashion would be an issue. You just didn't realize how immediate and awkward it would be. Time travel movies made it seem charming. Some clever tailoring montage, maybe a bit of improvisation with bed sheets. But reality, as it so often does, smells faintly of mold and humiliation. You're still wearing modern clothes. T-shirt, jeans, sneakers. Comfortable, familiar, and completely alien. The moment you walk down the street, you stick out like a senator at a gladiator match. People stare. Children giggle. An older man clutches his tunic and makes the sign of the gods, just in case you're an omen. You try to blend in, but it's impossible. Roman fashion is not subtle. It's draped, flowing. It's built from large rectangles of cloth pinned or wrapped strategically. Togas are iconic, but impractical for everyday wear. They're enormous, sometimes 6 meters of wool, and take practice to wear without tripping over your own dignity. Everyday Romans wore tunics. Simple, sleeveless or short-sleeved garments, belted at the waist, often reaching just above the knees. Your jeans are baffling to everyone. People reach out to touch the fabric, whispering, "Denim doesn't exist here." The weave is foreign. The stitching confusing. Pockets are considered mysterious sorcery. One child sees your zipper and runs away, convinced you have a demon in your trousers. You don't blame him. The materials of Roman clothing are natural, wool, linen, occasionally cotton imported at great cost. Dyes are muted unless you're rich. You, in your graphic t-shirt with a stylized cartoon platypus, might as well be a street performer. Or a lunatic. You begin to envy lunatics. At least they can wear what they want. Eventually, you find a market stall selling second-hand garments. You barter clumsily using a coin you found, or maybe stole. You're not sure if it was theft. Everything is chaos. In return, you receive a rough wool tunic. It smells like sheep and mildew. You change behind the stall, struggling to remove your shoes in public without offending someone or stepping in something unmentionable. Once you're dressed, you feel only slightly less ridiculous. The tunic is itchy. There is no tag saying 100% wool, but your skin confirms it. It hangs loosely, cinched with a bit of rope. The cloth is coarsely woven, and the seams are uneven. Fashion here is less about flair and more about function. And the function is mostly, don't be naked. Your feet are still bare. Shoes are expensive. Roman sandals were surprisingly well made, leather, nailed soles, often custom fitted. Without them, walking the filthy stone streets is a painful experience. You try to fashion some protection out of old cloth, but it barely holds. Every step feels like a small test of your willpower. You consider the full Roman outfit. For a man, this could mean a tunic under a toga. But togas are reserved for citizens, especially elite men. If you're not careful, wearing one might get you mistaken for someone important. Or worse, someone impersonating someone important. That's a punishable offense. In some places, even fatal. Women's clothing is more complicated. A stola over a tunic with a palla, something like a shawl, worn outdoors. Hairstyles are elaborate. Jewelry tells people your status, your wealth, your virtue. In Rome, clothes are not just for warmth. They're public statements. You don't dress for comfort. You dress for identity. Your modern brain resists this. You miss elastic. You miss zippers. You miss knowing which end of your outfit is up. Draping your tunic feels like trying to fold a fitted sheet with a hangover. There are pins involved. And ropes. And knots. You can't shake the feeling that if you sneeze, everything will unravel, and you'll end up wearing a toga like a loose burrito. Then there's laundry. Romans clean their clothes with urine. Public laundries, called fulonic, used fermented urine and clay to scrub the garments. Workers would stomp on the clothes in vats, working in the reek and slop all day. You imagine what your tunic went through before it arrived at the market. You try not to gag. You also try not to think too much about your own laundry routine moving forward. Underwear is minimal. Some people wore a subligaculum, a kind of loincloth, but many simply wore nothing under their tunics. You, however, cling to your modern underwear like it's a sacred relic. One small barrier between you and total integration. One last reminder that you are, somehow, still yourself. Accessories are equally loaded. A belt means more than utility, it shows status. A fibula, a kind of brooch, holds cloth together but also tells people your region, your rank, your connections. Every piece of attire speaks volumes, and you are illiterate in this language. You smile awkwardly at people, hoping your ignorance looks like eccentricity rather than criminality. As the day wears on, you start to forget your previous outfit. Your t-shirt is tucked into your bag, if you still have a bag. The tunic begins to feel slightly more natural. You stop pulling at the hem. You stop worrying about the smell. You still itch, but you itch with purpose. You are itchy, but you belong. In the evening, as you sit by a fountain, watching people pass in their own woolen rectangles, you realize something. No one cares anymore. You're just another face in the crowd. The right fabric, the right cut, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's humiliating, gives you invisibility. And in a world like ancient Rome, invisibility might be the most powerful accessory of all. You knew Latin would be a challenge. What you didn't expect was how quickly your modern tongue would betray you. The first time you try to speak to a Roman, your brain offers up high school Latin vocabulary you barely remember. Salve, you say. They blink. You try again. Quid agis. They squint at you like you're speaking through a sock. Classical Latin, it turns out, is not exactly what people on the streets of ancient Rome speak. That's the polished, literary version, the one found in poetry and political speeches. What most Romans actually use is vulgar Latin, a more casual, slang-filled version, full of contractions, idioms, and local quirks. Imagine trying to talk to a modern New Yorker using only lines from Shakespeare. That's what you sound like. You get by, sort of. Pointing helps. Mimicking facial expressions. Grunting. Eventually, you're able to communicate the basics: food, water, directions. But it's exhausting. Every word you try to say feels like you're chewing on broken pottery. You listen carefully to others, trying to mimic their sounds. You pick up fragments, phrases, but context is slippery. Meanings shift. One wrong vowel can turn "I'm hungry" into "I worship pigs." You learn this the hard way. People start treating you like a village fool. They smile too much, speak slowly, with exaggerated gestures. A kind woman pats your head and says something that sounds very kind, but could just as easily be pity, or an insult wrapped in charity. You're not sure. You nod and hope you're not agreeing to something disastrous. Then come the social landmines. Ancient Roman etiquette is a minefield of gestures, phrases, and customs. You try to shake someone's hand. They recoil. You point at something with one finger, and an old man crosses himself and mutters a curse. Apparently, that gesture means something unprintable. You say "gracias" to thank someone, but forget to bow your head. They look offended. You walk into a shop and forget to greet the owner first. They ignore you entirely. Later, someone explains, very slowly, and with hand gestures, that in Rome, greetings are essential. Skipping them is like walking into someone's house and spitting on the floor. You nod. You've already made that mistake 3 times. There's the issue of personal space. Romans don't have much. Conversations happen close, very close. You back away instinctively. They step forward. You back away again. It becomes a strange dance, like a social crab shuffle. Eventually you give up and try not to flinch when someone speaks into your nose. Names and introductions are complex, too. You are asked your name. You give it. Just your first name. They look confused. A proper Roman name includes the praenomen, first name, nomen, clan name, and cognomen, family or nickname. You have none of these. You are like a half-person, an orphan in the eyes of Roman society. When you don't offer a patronymic or indicate your social class, people assume you're a freedman. Or worse, a slave. You have no clear patron, no lineage, no mark of honor or heritage. You try to explain you're from far away. Very far away. But geography means little in this city where maps are guesses, and most people never leave the city walls. You are from nowhere. You are no one. You offend someone by touching a statue. It looked like a public decoration. Turns out it was sacred. A household god. The family whose doorstep you're standing on gasps. One woman spits 3 times. You mumble an apology and walk away quickly. There's a kind of language you start to understand better than Latin, body language. A sideways glance. A suspicious frown. People start to treat you with caution, then mild amusement. You realize you've become something in between spectacle and ghost. Someone who doesn't belong, but also doesn't threaten. An oddity to be tolerated. You begin copying people more. The way they walk. The way they pause before speaking. How they nod, how they raise their hands to greet or dismiss. You turn into a mimic. A pale shadow of Roman behavior. It feels artificial, but it works. People stop staring as much. You even get a few grunted greetings in return. That's the Roman way of saying, "I acknowledge your existence." It's progress. Humor is another minefield. You make a joke. It falls flat. Or worse, it angers someone. Roman humor is cruel, crude, and incredibly local. Jokes about slaves, politicians, and bodily functions are common. Your sarcasm doesn't translate. Your puns are incomprehensible. Irony is considered suspicious, something a philosopher might try, and no one trusts philosophers. You begin to listen more and speak less. Eventually, you discover that silence is safer. If you nod at the right time, you can seem wise. Or at least, not dangerous. You learn how to gesture without causing offense. You learn the phrases for, "I'm sorry, I don't understand," and, "Please don't call the guards." It takes weeks, but your ears adjust. The rhythm of speech becomes familiar. The sounds stop being noise and start becoming words. You catch jokes. You catch gossip. Someone asks if you're a foreign scribe. You nod. You don't even know what that means, but it sounds respectable. Eventually, someone offers you a first book, a wax tablet where a child once practiced basic dialogue. You copy the phrases by moonlight, whispering them to yourself. Greetings. Transactions. Apologies. By day, you repeat them to anyone who will listen. Some correct you. Others laugh. But gradually, the world begins to speak to you, and you begin to speak back. Still, the fear never fully leaves. Every conversation feels like crossing a narrow bridge made of old planks. One wrong word, and the whole thing collapses. But you keep walking anyway. And somehow, miraculously, you're still standing. You wake up one morning in ancient Rome with a sore throat. Just a tickle, you tell yourself. Maybe too much dust in the air. Or you slept with your mouth open. You try to ignore it. But by midday, you're burning up. Sweaty. Dizzy. And suddenly, it hits you like a wagon of bricks. You are sick. In a time without antibiotics, without vaccines, and without real understanding of germs. Welcome to Roman medicine. The first hurdle is figuring out what's wrong. In the modern world, you'd book an appointment, get a swab, maybe start antibiotics. In Rome, diagnosis starts with your humors. That's not a joke. Literally, your body is ruled by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you're sick, it's because one of these is out of balance. Too much phlegm, you're cold and sluggish. Too much yellow bile, you're irritable and feverish. The cure: balance them. Through diet, bleeding, vomiting, or enemas. You decide to visit a medicus, a Roman doctor. But here's the thing, anyone can claim to be a doctor. There's no license, no university degree, no standard of practice. Your medicus might be trained in Alexandria's famous libraries, or he might have learned from watching his uncle poke wounds with sticks. It's a coin toss. You meet him in a smoky, cramped room filled with odd smells, vinegar, herbs, and something unmistakably like rotting meat. He doesn't ask about symptoms. Instead, he studies your urine. Literally. He holds a glass jar up to the light like it's wine. Sniffs it. Frowns. He proclaims your humors are out of order. He recommends a purge. You ask what that means. He smiles. Later, you regret asking. The treatment involves drinking something thick, brown, and foul. You gag. Minutes later, your body rebels in every way it can. You spend hours hovering over a clay bowl. He says it's working. You're not so sure. Eventually, he suggests bloodletting. Just a little. A cut to the forearm to release the heat. You protest. He insists. You give in. He pulls out a bronze scalpel that looks more like a spoon. After a few precise slices and some dabbing with wine-soaked cloth, he declares you lighter and better balanced. You're mostly just dizzy. He also recommends bathing. Roman baths are a communal experience. Hot, steamy, and full of half-naked strangers. You drag yourself there, hoping the heat will help. The cauldrium, hot bath, is relaxing, but you also worry about the hygiene. The water isn't changed often, and everyone shares it. You try not to think about the cuts and infections in that soup of humanity. There's an apothecary who sells remedies. You visit, hoping for something closer to a modern medicine. The shelves are lined with dried herbs, crushed minerals, and jars of unidentifiable things. He offers a powder made from dried mouse brains. 4 headaches. You decline. Then he tries powdered snail shell. 4 fevers. You're too tired to argue. You buy it. The apothecary also sells charms and talismans. A silver pendant shaped like a face. It's supposed to ward off evil spirits. You realize medicine in Rome isn't just physical, it's spiritual. Illness is often blamed on the gods, on bad omens, on curses. People burn offerings, make sacrifices, whisper prayers. You start doing it too. Just in case. Bed rest is rare. There's no sick leave in Rome. Unless you're wealthy, you work through your illness. You see sick people still hauling bricks, selling vegetables, tending goats. You realize your privilege in the modern world, not just access to medicine, but the time to be sick. Public health doesn't exist yet. There are aqueducts, yes, but also open sewers. Latrines that flush waste into the Tiber. Flies everywhere. Water is rarely boiled. Meat is sold from street carts buzzing with flies. You see people picking through garbage. You see others spitting into fountains. Everything feels like a disease waiting to happen. You pass through neighborhoods with high infant mortality, where children have pot bays from malnutrition and women die in childbirth. Life expectancy is low, maybe 35 if you're lucky. Even lower for the poor. Disease is constant: malaria, tuberculosis, dysentery, typhoid. You realize that survival here is not just about knowledge, it's about luck. Your modern immune system isn't built for this. You grew up with filtered water and pasteurized milk. Rome is a microbial war zone. You spend most days hovering between mild sickness and full collapse. Cuts fester. Infections spread. You miss hand sanitizer more than you miss electricity. In a desperate moment, you try to explain germ theory. You draw little squiggles in the dirt, try to show how invisible things make people sick. They nod politely, then offer you leeches. You give up. You start avoiding people. Not out of rudeness, but survival. Crowds are dangerous. You begin wearing a scarf over your mouth. People laugh. You don't care. You boil your water when you can. You clean wounds with vinegar. You eat food only when it's steaming hot. These little tricks keep you alive. Eventually, your fever breaks. You still don't know what you had. The medicus says you're cured. The apothecary says it was the snail powder. The old woman who spat on your doorway says it was her prayer to Apollo. You say nothing. You're just glad to be upright. You walk through the streets with a new respect. For the people who survive this every day. For the resilience it takes to live without modern medicine. You realize that here, knowledge isn't power. Survival is. You keep a little pouch now, filled with herbs, charms, and a small knife you sterilize with wine. Not because you believe it all works, but because this is Rome. And in Rome, every day healthy is a small miracle. You are hungry. Not just snacky, but truly, stomach rumbling hungry. And you're in ancient Rome, where hunger is a different kind of problem. There's no convenience store. No refrigeration. No nutritional labels or expiration dates. Just a lot of mystery food, sold in stalls, carried in baskets, or bubbling in cracked clay pots. And every bite is a gamble. Let's start with water. The Tiber River flows through Rome like a pulsing vein. It looks majestic from a distance, until you get close. Then you notice the garbage floating along the banks. Human waste. Animal carcasses. Rotting vegetables. People still draw water from it. And worse, wash clothes and bathe in it. If you're lucky enough to be in a wealthy domus, you get aqueduct-fed fountains. Aqueducts are Rome's engineering pride. Flowing water, often fresh from the mountains. But fresh is a relative term. Pipes are often lead-lined. You've read about lead poisoning. You try not to think about it as you sip. You start boiling your water, just like you learned from camping. But firewood is precious. Charcoal is expensive. And if you live in an insula, one of the cramped apartment blocks, you probably share a kitchen, if you have one at all. Fires are common. So you end up drinking posca, a vinegar water mix, served to soldiers and laborers. It tastes awful. But at least it's sour enough to kill some bacteria. Now for food. You head to a popina, a street tavern. They're everywhere. Little open front shops with slabs of meat hanging like sad curtains. Huge clay jars, dolia, are sunk into the counters, filled with lentils, olives, wine, fish stew. No menus. No refrigeration. Just whatever the owner decided to cook today, usually from yesterday's leftovers. You point to something that looks like stew. It's served lukewarm in a shallow bowl. You take a bite. It's salty. A little sour. You choose something chewy and try not to ask what it was. Meat, maybe. Rat, possibly. You eat slowly, listening to your stomach, hoping for peace. Meat is expensive in Rome. Most people don't eat it often. When they do, it's usually salted pork, tough goat, or dried sausage. Fresh meat goes bad quickly. You spot meat hanging on hooks with flies swarming. Vendors brush them off casually. You step back. Instead, people eat grains. Lots and lots of grains. Pulse, a kind of barley porridge, is the Roman equivalent of oatmeal. It's bland, but filling. You see people eating it with onions or garlic. Some mix in fish sauce, garum. You've heard of garum. Fermented fish guts aged in the sun. It smells like death but tastes like concentrated salt. Romans put it on everything. Bread is common too, but it's not the fluffy loaf you're used to. Roman bread is dense, dark, and gritty. Gritty because the grain was ground with stone, and bits of rock end up in the flour. You chew carefully. Ancient teeth wore down fast. Dentists are rare, and dental pain is constant. One cracked molar and you're in agony for weeks. You wonder about vegetables. Rome has them: cabbage, leeks, lentils, turnips. But they're seasonal. No imports from Mexico. No green beans in winter. No bananas, no tomatoes, no potatoes. No sugar, either. If you want something sweet, your best hope is honey, and only the rich have it regularly. You spot a child selling dates. You buy a few. They're shriveled but delicious. Then you remember you've been told that many vendors dip fruits in water to make them look fresh. Tiber water. You chew slower. Your stomach gurgles. You regret your decision. Food preservation is primitive. Salting, drying, smoking. That's it. No fridges. No ice boxes unless you're in a palace. Everything has to be eaten quickly, or slowly rot in a bowl on a hot windowsill. You find yourself sniffing every meal. Every bite is a risk assessment. You've developed a sixth sense for, maybe don't eat that. One day, you visit a Roman feast. A wealthy patrician's banquet. The food is extravagant. Roast peacock. Stuffed dormice. Flamingo tongue. You're both fascinated and horrified. The flavors are odd, sweet and savory mixed, spiced with cumin and vinegar. And always garum. The rich overindulge, then deliberately vomit between courses to make room. There's a special room for that. You skip dessert. You learn to shop like a Roman. At the Macellum, the central market. It's crowded and loud. People shout prices, haggle, cheat. You carry coins, but keep them hidden. You see pickpockets eyeing you. You learn to check fish by their eyes. Cloudy means old. You learn to avoid milk unless it's been turned to cheese. You find yourself preferring nuts and dried figs. Safer. Street food is popular. But it's also dangerous. Vendors fry food in reused oil, over smoky coals. You try something like a fritter. Crunchy. Then you find a chicken bone inside. Maybe a wing. Maybe not. You stop chewing. You spit it into a cloth. Drinks are limited. Beer is rare and considered barbaric. Wine is everywhere, but always watered down. Pure wine is seen as uncivilized. The rich mix theirs with honey or herbs. The poor get vinegar wine. You try both. Neither satisfies. You miss coffee, tea, even plain cold water from a tap. You would give anything for a bottle of clean mineral water. You begin to feel cautious, even paranoid. You wash fruits in vinegar. You carry stale bread. You start skipping meals. You remember all the food safety rules from modern life. Don't eat raw meat. Beware dairy. Avoid reheated rice. But in Rome, all of it is unavoidable. Somehow, you survive. You adapt. You stop looking for flavor and start searching for calories. You eat to not die. Not for joy. Your body changes. You get lean. You crave simple foods. Lentils. Olives. Hard cheese. You chew slowly and breathe deeply after every safe meal. Because in ancient Rome, every full stomach is a temporary victory. At first, you walk into ancient Rome with confidence. You're the time traveler. The one with the knowledge of antibiotics, airplanes, electricity, calculus, and cholesterol. Compared to these toga-wearing locals, you're a genius. A walking Wikipedia with Wi-Fi in your brain. Or so you think. That illusion lasts about an hour. The first challenge comes when a Roman merchant starts haggling with you. You try to explain supply and demand. He blinks. You attempt a metaphor. He scoffs. You realize, you don't speak Latin fluently. You kind of remember, Caesar estate in Hordo, from school. But beyond that, you're lost. They talk fast. The accent is strange. You try to fake it, but every sentence sounds like a confused spell. Then you try to share some knowledge. You know, one day we'll have flying machines that go faster than sound. A group of men burst into laughter. And we'll walk on the moon. They're laughing harder now. You're just the village lunatic with dirty shoes and wild stories. You attempt to draw a steam engine in the dirt. You know it uses heat and pressure. But then someone asks you, how exactly does a piston work? You pause. You vaguely remember diagrams and YouTube videos, but not the specifics. You try to explain with gestures. It doesn't work. You're waving your arms like an angry chicken. Maybe medicine, then. You're sure you remember enough first aid to help someone. A man comes in with a deep cut. You panic. You have no bandages. No antiseptic. You shout boil water. They stare. You try to clean it with vinegar. He screams. You try to stitch the wound with a sharpened bone needle. It's not going well. You now understand why people just died of infections back then. You think of introducing something simple, like the concept of the germ. You explain that invisible creatures make people sick. They ask where these creatures live. On your hands, you say. They look at their hands. In water, you add. They frown. Someone suggests maybe you're possessed. You're nearly burned as a witch by nightfall. Maybe engineering, then. You recall aqueducts, roads, and arches. But so do they. They already have those things. You try to describe reinforced concrete. But you don't remember the exact ratios. You just say, add some volcanic ash. They already do that. They look unimpressed. You try to describe skyscrapers. They laugh again. Maybe you can show them electricity. You get a stick and try rubbing it with a cloth to build static. Nothing happens. No lightning. No sparks. A child offers you a bronze coin and says, "Can you make this glow?" You can't. You stare at the sun and feel defeated. Even a flashlight would have been useful, if only you had batteries. But you don't. You have nothing but what's in your head. And your head, you're discovering, isn't quite ready. You try to describe how to build a simple generator. But you don't know how to create copper wire. Or how to mine magnets. You realize how many pieces modern technology relies on, and how impossible it is to recreate them without industrial infrastructure. You can explain the idea, but you can't build a single thing. You have modern knowledge, but you're in an ancient world. You're like a software engineer trying to build a computer using only firewood and rope. You try art next, but even drawing with charcoal is harder than it seems. You sketch the solar system in the dirt. The earth goes around the sun, you say. A priest overhears. He declares you a heretic. You're summoned for questioning. Your drawing is washed away by a goat. You realize that even your modern science is useless without instruments. No telescope. No microscope. You can describe them, sure, but you can't build a lens. You have no glass. No grinding tools. You're just repeating things you once read on a blog, or watched on a 12-minute video with dramatic music. Cooking. That should be safe. You try to bake bread. But the yeast you need isn't in a packet here. You try to make sourdough starter. It takes a week. It grows mold. You eat it anyway. You get sick. You lie in bed groaning, trying to remember if you've just ingested botulism. You attempt to help build a cart. But you don't know carpentry. You don't know how to bend wood. You try to describe a bicycle. But you don't know how to forge a chain. Or build rubber tires. You end up drawing circles. Someone makes you a wooden wheel. You feel like you've gone backward. You consider writing. You miss keyboards. Pens. Paper. You try carving notes into wax tablets. It's slow. Your handwriting is awful. You attempt to write a book of modern wisdom. You get to the second sentence, and realize you can't spell photosynthesis in Latin. You get stuck explaining how digestion works. You abandon the project. The tablet ends up in a fire. Eventually, you stop trying to change history. You realize that you are not a great innovator. You're not Da Vinci. You're not even a good plumber. Your modern knowledge is vague, scattered, and built on tools you no longer have. Without Google, without electricity, without libraries, you are just a strange person from the future who eats lentils badly. You now understand why most time travel stories involve people getting burned at the stake, or ending up quietly farming barley and blending in. You begin doing the same. You stop preaching. You sweep floors. You help carry bricks. You try not to speak too much about space travel. And yet, your knowledge isn't useless. Not entirely. You notice when food smells off. You boil water now, without question. You teach a child to wash their hands before eating. You stop a small cut from becoming infected. These are not world-changing things. But they matter. Because in the end, surviving Rome isn't about being a genius. It's about humility. And realizing that history is built, not flipped like a switch. You may not bring Rome the light bulb. But maybe, just maybe, you can help one child grow up a little healthier. And that's enough for now. You might think that navigating ancient Rome would be easy. After all, it's famous for its straight roads and impressive infrastructure. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," had to come from somewhere, right? But as soon as you step into the chaos of Roman transportation, that confidence drains from you faster than wine at a toga party. Yes, there are roads. Miles and miles of them. Over 250,000 miles of road network with 50,000 miles of paved stone highways. And yes, they're marvels of engineering for their time. But here's the problem, they don't come with signs. There are no glowing green highway markers. No, exit 14, Ostia, signs. No GPS chirping, in 300 feet, turn left. In fact, there's no real map that makes sense to you. The Romans had maps, sure. But they weren't made for casual street-level navigation. The Tabula Peutingeriana, one of the most famous Roman maps, looks less like a Google map and more like a psychedelic subway diagram made by someone who never left their house. It's long and squished, with distorted geography, emphasizing connections rather than accuracy. You try to ask for directions. Someone says, head east past the second aqueduct, turn left at the bakery with the fat dog, and follow the smell of fish. That would be fine, if you had any idea where east was. You don't. The sun is up, sure. But you didn't bring a compass. And the Romans haven't invented one yet. You're lost within an hour. The city itself is a labyrinth. Rome, at its peak, had over 1 million residents. And the urban layout was chaotic. There were narrow, winding alleys that seemed to curve for no reason. Dead ends. Hidden stairways. And every neighborhood had its own quirks. Some areas were full of bathhouses. Others, wine shops and questionable taverns. And if you take one wrong turn, you might end up in a part of town where people don't appreciate your strange sandals and poor Latin. You try to blend in by watching the locals. Some ride in carts pulled by donkeys. But wheeled vehicles are banned during the daytime inside the city. So you walk. Everyone walks. Rich people have litters carried by slaves. But you don't have slaves. You have sore feet and the wrong shoes. The street itself is an obstacle course. The paving stones are uneven. There are stepping stones for crossing when the road floods with waste and rain. You step ankle deep into something that you pray is just mud. You begin to appreciate the ancient Roman obsession with sandals. At least they dry quickly. Trying to travel outside the city is even worse. You want to go to Pompeii. You estimate it should take a day. It takes 4. The road is in good shape, but you're not used to walking 20 miles a day. Your legs scream. You run out of food. You have no map. You follow some traders who are heading south, and hope they don't rob you. There are inns along the way, called koppen, but they are not charming countryside hostels. They are filthy, often full of fleas, and the food is suspicious. You consider sleeping outside, but wild dogs and thieves make you think twice. The stars are pretty, but you're too afraid to enjoy them. Back in the city, even trying to meet someone is a challenge. Meet me at the forum, they say. There are at least 3 forums. You pick the wrong one. You wait for an hour. A man sells you olives. You still don't find your friend. You begin drawing your own map. Every day, you add streets, landmarks, weird trees, places with nice smells. But without parchment, you carve it into wood. The detail is awful. The scale is laughable. But at least you stop getting entirely lost. Sometimes. There's no standard wayfinding. No house numbers. People identify homes by statues, painted symbols, or who lives there. You ask, where is Lucius? They reply, past the corner where the man with the crooked nose sells fish. You never find Lucius. You try to use the stars at night. But the light from torches and street fires makes them hard to see. And besides, you never really learned to navigate by the stars. You only watched a documentary about it once. With popcorn. Even travel by water is complicated. You think a boat down the Tiber would be a relaxing shortcut. It's not. The boat smells like fish and sweat. The boatman demands double fare when he hears your accent. You try to protest. You are thrown off. Eventually, you start learning the layout by instinct. You notice which temples cast shadows in the morning. Which bathhouses are near which bakeries. Which fountains are safe to drink from. You stop asking for directions. You start following your nose, your ears, and the distant sound of public shouting. You miss GPS. You miss Uber. You miss being able to look up best walking route to Colosseum. You even miss traffic. Because at least modern traffic comes with air conditioning. Still, over time, the streets become familiar. You start recognizing faces. The fish guy waves. The baker nods. You stop feeling like a lost soul in a marble jungle. You may not be Roman, but now, at least, you can find your way to the forum without stepping in anything too terrible. And that's a victory. In ancient Rome, Even knowing how to get from point A to point B is a triumph. Just don't try to explain it with a Google Earth reference. They still think you're a little crazy. So you've made it to ancient Rome. You've survived the sanitation, dodged illness, and you're finally starting to understand how to get around the city without wandering into a fish market when you meant to visit a bathhouse. And now you're hungry. You want to buy food. Maybe a loaf of bread, some cheese, maybe even a warm stew if you're feeling adventurous. But here's the problem. You reach into your pocket, and what you have is utterly worthless. Modern money, sleek credit cards, or even your neatly folded banknotes mean absolutely nothing here. You could wave a $100 bill in the face of a Roman vendor, and they'd probably use it to wipe their hands after gutting a fish. They've never seen printed paper money. Coins are the only form of currency, and even then, it's not just about shiny metal. It's about which metal, what weight, what emperor's face is on it, and what kind of coin it actually is. Roman currency was a complex system. There were silver denarii, bronze asses, gold auri, copper quadrants, and a dizzying array of other denominations. And their values shifted over time, depending on inflation, politics, and whether the latest emperor decided to dilute the silver content to pay for his pet projects. That's right. Roman coins were subject to inflation too. You're not escaping the economy just because you time traveled. You think you're clever. Maybe you've brought some silver or gold jewelry from the future. Something to trade. But Romans aren't easily impressed. They want coinage that's recognizable, with weight and markings they can verify. Anything else is suspicious. You're basically trying to pass monopoly money in a real economy. You could end up in trouble. And let's talk about pricing. How much does a loaf of bread cost? Maybe half an as. Maybe more if there's a grain shortage. A cup of wine. A quadrans, if it's cheap stuff. But wine varies wildly in quality and price. Want a tunic? That'll cost several denarii. But how do you know which coins are which? They're not color-coded. They're worn, faded, and often misstruck. You try asking someone what things cost. They rattle off a number that means nothing to you. This amphora of olive oil, 8 asses. You blink. Asses. You laugh. They don't. Because, as, is a real coin. And now you look like an idiot, who doesn't even know how money works. So you do what modern people often do when confused abroad. You just hand over too much, and hope for change. But there's a problem. Change isn't guaranteed. The seller might not have it. Or they might simply take your overpayment and walk away. You try to argue. But in bad Latin, you just sound like you're having a stroke. You're fleeced within the hour. Banking exists, but not in the way you think. There are argentarii, moneylenders and bankers. They hold accounts and perform exchanges, but you need reputation. You need introductions. And you need to speak the language of finance. Not the kind you learned watching online investment videos. Real Roman financial Latin. Which you don't know. They turn you away with a polite smile. Or, sometimes, not so polite suspicion. You get desperate. You try bartering. Maybe that wristwatch you brought will be enough for a meal. Someone's curious about it, but they think it's cursed. Or maybe magical. That makes you a target. Someone follows you home. You realize that having shiny things and no idea how money works is a bad combination. Roman vendors are sharp. They know their weights. They bite coins. They check edges. They even scratch the metal to test purity. You can't fake it. And if you try, you might be accused of forgery. Which is a capital offense. That's right. Trying to pass off bad coinage could get you beaten, imprisoned, or worse. Even if you do somehow get your hands on real Roman coins, knowing their value is a nightmare. Prices fluctuate. A loaf of bread could cost one price in the morning and another in the evening, depending on grain shipments, weather, and supply. You can't predict it. You're used to price tags, scanners, discounts, Coupons. Those don't exist here. You haggle. Every time. And you're terrible at it. Taxes are another layer of confusion. You owe taxes for everything. There are property taxes, market taxes, taxes on inheritance, taxes on trade. And none of it is automated. You have to pay in person. To the right collector. On time. Or they seize your stuff. Or worse, accuse you of evasion. And tax evaders in Rome don't get audits. They get punishments. Public ones. Eventually, you just stop trying to buy things. You live on charity. You follow a religious procession and hope they hand out bread. You learn to beg in Latin. You become that weird guy with strange clothes and no money sense. The locals nickname you something. Probably unflattering. You realize that economic survival isn't just about having currency. It's about having the right currency. The right knowledge. The right social networks. And you have none of those. You're functionally broke in one of the richest empires in history. At night, you think about your credit card. How simple it was to swipe, tap, or click. Here, everything is slow. Uncertain. Physical. If you lose a coin, it's gone. No cancel button. No fraud alert. Just an empty belly. You start picking up small tasks. Carrying water. Cleaning baths. Watching sheep. You earn a few asses here and there. Enough to survive. You learn what a denarius is worth. You stop laughing at the word, as. You become invisible. One of the many struggling to keep up with the Roman economy. And you understand, truly, deeply, why time travel isn't a cheat code. Knowledge is power, but only when you can speak the language, navigate the laws, and understand the value of a coin. Otherwise, you're just another lost soul in the marketplace, hungry, confused, and broke. So, you've been stumbling your way through ancient Rome. You've tried to buy a loaf of bread, with future knowledge and failed. You've discovered that your credit card is good for exactly nothing. You've begged in bad Latin, lost money in confusing markets, and possibly offended a few temple priests by asking for directions during a sacrifice. Now, maybe, you're wondering, where exactly do you fit into this massive, complicated machine called the Roman Empire? Spoiler alert, it's near the bottom. The Roman class system wasn't subtle. It was rigid, visible, and baked into every part of life, from clothing to speech to how you were punished when you inevitably got something wrong. Unlike today, where wealth might disguise a poor education or fame might cover up your origins, Roman society labeled you like a wine amphora, contents, date, and origin clearly stamped. And if you think your modern credentials will help you climb the ladder, think again. At the very top are the senators, the senatorial class. Think of them as the ultra-elite. They owned massive estates, commanded political power, and wore clothes that shouted their status. Literally, only senators could wear a toga with a broad purple stripe. If you tried to fake it, people would notice immediately. Your fabric would be wrong. Your posture wouldn't match. And your Latin, would be painfully inadequate. They'd dismiss you with a raised eyebrow and a muttered insult about barbarians. Beneath them were the equites, or equestrian class. Originally, these were literally men who could afford horses. Over time, they evolved into the business elite, tax collectors, bankers, administrators. They didn't wear togas with broad stripes, but theirs had narrow ones, like the discounted version of senatorial privilege. Still very much upper class. You don't belong here either. You have no lineage, no Latin fluency, no Roman business connections. You're not getting in. Ever. The plebeians come next. This is the vast working and middle class of Rome. Farmers, artisans, shopkeepers, builders. They're not rich, but they're citizens. They can vote. They can marry other citizens. They can own property. You might think this is your spot. But even here, things get tricky. Plebeians were born into Rome. They had family networks, legal records, tribal affiliations. You just showed up. No name anyone recognizes, no property, no history. To them, you're not plebeian. You're something stranger. Now we come to the freedmen, former slaves who were legally manumitted. They had restricted rights, couldn't hold major political office, and were still tied to their former masters by patronage. But they could make a living. They could earn money. Some became very wealthy. Their children could even become citizens. You might think this is a path. But even this has gatekeepers. Freedmen had to be freed by a Roman citizen in a formal ceremony. You have no master to free you. No path to that status. So even this low rung is above you. Then we reach the servi, slaves. They're not citizens. They're property. They have no legal personhood. They cannot marry, only cohabit. They can be beaten, sold, even killed with little legal consequence. Most slaves are prisoners of war, children born to other slaves, or debtors. Could you be mistaken for a slave? Possibly. You dress strangely. You speak poorly. You have no documentation, no money, no one to vouch for you. It wouldn't take much. A wrong word, a wrong place, and suddenly you're owned. And below that, there are non-persons. Foreigners without status. Captives not yet enslaved. Criminals in chains. The utterly expendable. People who have no name, no standing, and no future. This is where you probably land. You're a curiosity. An outsider. Some call you peregrinus, a foreigner. But not the kind with diplomatic clout. You're more like a stray dog with a vocabulary problem. Social mobility is nearly impossible. You don't get to climb because you work hard. You climb by birth, by favor, or by immense wealth. And you have none of those. You can't marry into a better class. Marriages are arranged, and status is guarded like gold. Even wearing the wrong clothing can get you punished. Togas were classed. Shoes were classed. Rings, hairstyles, the way you walked, everything signaled status. And everything you do screams, confused outsider. If you're lucky, you'll fall into a patron-client relationship. Patrons were upper-class Romans, who took clients under their wing. In exchange for loyalty and services, clients might get protection, food, even occasional payments. But being a client means being entirely dependent. You show up at dawn to greet your patron. You cheer him in public. You might carry his messages, or follow him into court. It's feudalism before feudalism. It's survival through subservience. But it's better than being invisible. Even the baths were segregated by class. Rich people had private bath hours. The rest squeezed in, when they could. Food, housing, education, all were determined by where you stood. And you stand nowhere. You might as well be a ghost. Except you eat. And ghosts don't need money. Eventually, you give up trying to fit in. You become invisible by choice. You find a small job. Cleaning floors, carrying water, fetching things. People stop questioning you if you stay quiet and useful. You learn to dress down. You mimic their walk, their posture. You become background noise in a loud city. And slowly, very slowly, you realize that this society was never meant to include you. Not because you're bad, or lazy, or unlucky. But because you arrived without the only currency that matters in Rome, status. And status is the one thing you can't borrow, buy, or fake. You either have it, or you don't. And you, time traveler, definitely don't. You don't mean to break the law. In fact, you're trying very hard not to. But ancient Rome is not built for your understanding. It's built on a web of traditions, customs, and legal systems that are entirely alien. Even the basic rules, when to speak, where to walk, whom to greet, are traps for the modern visitor. And the consequences. Far from a friendly warning. Roman justice was fast, often brutal, and painfully indifferent to the intentions behind your crime. Let's start with property. Rome was obsessed with ownership. Property defined everything: class, rights, Responsibilities. Touching something without permission, even briefly, can be interpreted as freedom, theft. Pick up an apple from a stall to examine it. That's theft. Walk into someone's garden because it looks public. Trespassing. Sit on a step that belongs to a merchant's shop. That's squatting. And without legal status or citizenship, you have no right to dispute the charge. The accuser's word weighs more than yours. You're just a strange person in a stranger's world. Speech can also betray you. Romans had strict norms about deference, honor, and hierarchy. Addressing a senator improperly, even with good intentions, could be interpreted as disrespect. And disrespect could qualify as injuria, or personal offense. It didn't matter if you were confused or didn't understand the Latin. Roman law didn't have exceptions for tourists. You speak out of turn, you get slapped, or worse. Let's say you witness a street brawl, and step in to help. Modern instincts say you're doing the right thing. Roman law disagrees. If you're not an authority figure, or a party to the conflict, you're interfering. If someone gets hurt, you could be blamed. Worse, if you touch someone, who later accuses you of assault, that becomes a legal case, and the penalty is usually corporal. Public flogging is not off the table. Now let's talk about religious spaces. You pass a small temple. It's quiet, almost empty. You walk inside out of curiosity. You don't realize it's closed to the public during rites. Or worse, you accidentally step beyond a line where only priests may walk. That's sacrilege, a crime against the gods. In modern times, you might just be asked to leave. In Rome, you might be dragged outside and beaten. Or fined an amount you can't even calculate. And remember, you have no currency, no legal representation, and no defense. Let's assume you somehow offend a statue. Yes, even that's a problem. Statues in Rome weren't just decorations. They represented gods, emperors, and ancestral spirits. Accidentally knock over a statue. That's damnum in iuria datum, causing harm unlawfully. A serious charge. If it's a religious idol, you've doubled your offense. And if the statue belonged to someone important, expect punishment, possibly exile, or public humiliation, or labor service. None of which are explained to you before they're carried out. You might also run afoul of sumptuary laws, rules governing appearance. Rome cared deeply about what people wore, and who wore what. If your clothes are too fine or too colorful, someone might accuse you of impersonating nobility. If they're too ragged or mismatched, you may be mistaken for a runaway slave. Either way, the result is unpleasant. People may avoid you, shout at you, or drag you to a magistrate. Speaking of slaves, another trap waits there. You offer a coin to a beggar. A kind gesture. But if the person is someone else's property, you've just interfered with their slave without permission. That's a punishable offense. And don't even think about offering shelter or assistance to someone fleeing an abusive master. Helping a runaway slave is a serious crime. Even a citizen could be flogged or fined. You might simply disappear into a labor camp. Then there's currency. Rome used a complex and specific system of coinage. Denarii, sestertii, asses. They were weighted, tested, and accepted by reputation. If you try to trade something unusual, say, a shiny button from your backpack, someone may call it fraud. If they report it to a magistrate, you're in trouble. There's no assumption of innocence. Just suspicion. And the punishment may not wait for a trial. Romans also had strong rules about movement. Certain roads, bridges, or neighborhoods were restricted. Some were reserved for elites. Others were under military protection. Wandering into a restricted area could be interpreted as spying or trespass. If caught, you might be imprisoned. Not in a cell with rights, but in a holding pit, chained and ignored. And if you're accused of something, anything, you'll quickly discover how Roman trials work. There is no public defender. You speak Latin poorly. You can't call witnesses. No one understands your context. And if your accuser is of higher status, their word is gold. You might be fined, branded, or whipped. Public shaming is common. So is being paraded through the forum with a sign describing your crime. The humiliation is the point. If you think you can appeal to higher authorities, good luck. You're not a citizen. You're not in the army. You're not a taxpayer or landowner. You have no standing. Roman law protects Romans. Everyone else is at the mercy of fortune, bribery, and patronage. And you have none of those. The truth is, nearly every action you take without thinking could violate a law or offend a custom. You are out of step, out of language, and out of time. Modern common sense doesn't apply. Intentions don't matter. All that matters is perception, and you're constantly being perceived as strange, suspicious, or subversive. So, you learn to move slowly. Speak less. Watch more. You study the rhythm of the city. The way people hold their hands in public. The side of the street they walk on. The way they bow or nod or stand still. You mimic them, one gesture at a time. And slowly, the world becomes just a little less hostile. But the laws are still there, waiting. Like open traps. You never forget that. Because in ancient Rome, survival means constant vigilance, and the quiet, exhausting labor of not being noticed. You stand in the middle of a bustling Roman street. Dust kicks up with every passing sandal. Oxen snort as they drag carts filled with amphorae. Fishmongers shout their daily offers, and the sharp scent of olive oil mingles with sweat, smoke, and urine. You're not trying to draw attention to yourself, but you do. You're dressed strangely. You walk with a different posture. You speak Latin with an accent that sounds like garbled nonsense. And worst of all, you don't know your place. To the average Roman, that makes you dangerous. At first, they don't know what to make of you. The Roman world isn't unfamiliar with foreigners. Rome is an empire, after all, a sponge absorbing Gauls, Greeks, Egyptians, Syrians, and more. But even foreigners have a pattern. They know their status. They come from somewhere known, speak with familiar cadences, and either belong, or they don't. You are a question mark in human form. Too clean, too odd, and far too confident for someone without a toga or a slave. At first, the response is curiosity. Children point. Old women squint. Vendors watch you sidelong as you pass. Your gestures are wrong. You don't greet the Lars, the household gods, properly when entering a building. You forget to bow before shrines. You don't wear the right insignia if you're a citizen, or worse, you're mistaken for one without the legal backing. In a world where every rank has a costume, you walk around dressed like a puzzle. The average Roman doesn't have time to figure you out. They assume the worst, because the Roman mindset values order, status, control. You are none of these things. You're what they'd call a peregrinus incertus, a wandering outsider. Possibly a spy. Possibly a runaway. Maybe even a barbarian, though you're oddly pale and your accent doesn't match any known tongue. So you're filed into the only category left, suspicious. They might first think you're touched by the gods, divinus furor, divine madness. Rome had a place for those who saw visions or acted oddly, but it wasn't a place of honor. It was caution. The average Roman doesn't trust what they don't understand, and there's a deep, superstitious layer in daily life. So if your eyes wander too much, if you mutter in English under your breath, or fumble with unfamiliar coins or objects, you are treated with wary glances. Or avoided entirely. You try to blend in. But that only makes it worse. You nod when you should remain silent. You hold eye contact with a woman of status for too long. You touch someone in passing, a hand on the arm to move by, and it's interpreted as impudicitia, indecency. These aren't just social missteps. They're seen as a kind of moral deficiency. Romans assume you've either been raised poorly, or you were born outside civilization altogether. Then comes the laughter. Street children mimic you. A baker wipes his hands, and shouts a joke you don't understand, and the whole market roars with laughter. You are a living entertainment, but not in a kind way. In the way that makes people feel better about themselves, because they are not you. You become a walking insult to Roman identity, a caricature of incompetence. And if you speak too much about your world, your future, your inventions, or medicines or democracy, you've crossed a line. Romans are proud. Deeply so. They don't care for the idea that someone else's world might be more advanced. Especially not from someone without a name, family, or rank. You could be accused of lying. Or of witchcraft. The average Roman doesn't distinguish between science and sorcery. Either way, your tales of airplanes, electricity, or democracy will earn you mockery, or worse, suspicion. Even your hygiene betrays you. You brush your teeth daily with odd materials. You won't use the communal sponge on a stick in the latrine. You're seen washing your hands with strange urgency. It seems unnatural to them. Too fastidious. Possibly a sickness of the mind. To a Roman soldier, you look weak. Too slow. Too thoughtful. You hesitate when told to move. You don't carry a weapon. Your body isn't hardened by farm work or battle. That makes you useless. To a merchant, you're a terrible customer. You haggle badly. You don't know fair prices. You ask strange questions about food purity, and lead in pipes. To a priest, you're sacrilegious without even realizing it. You won't make the right offerings. You don't know which gods protect which corners of the home. And when you speak of monotheism or evolution or germ theory, they suspect you're possessed, or worse, a threat to public order. The average Roman does not think of you as special. You are not a sage. You are not a hero from the future. You are, in most eyes, a strange beggar with delusions. Possibly mad. Possibly diseased. Definitely low status. If you're lucky, someone might take pity on you and toss you a crust of bread. If not, you're ignored, left to wander, confused, between the cracks of a city that never slows down for anyone. But there's a silver lining. Rome is big. Crowded. Loud. And if you're careful, if you learn the rhythms of the people, their gestures, their speech, you might slowly pass into the background. Not respected. Not embraced. But tolerated. That's the best outcome you can hope for. Because to the average Roman, someone who goes unnoticed is often safer than someone who tries to stand out. In a city of marble and blood, the best kind of invisibility is being no one at all. And for someone like you, out of place, out of time, and completely misunderstood, that's the only peace you'll ever know. You're not a gladiator. You're not a senator. You're not even a vaguely useful tradesman. You've landed in ancient Rome with nothing but your wits, your fragile modern hygiene, and a deeply limited understanding of Latin. So the first question is, how do you not die? You don't fight. You don't argue. You don't try to impress people with what you know. You do something deeply unmodern. You play dumb. That's right, your best survival skill isn't intelligence. It's humility. Because in Rome, being clever without status is a dangerous combination. The lower classes aren't supposed to challenge anything. If you start questioning temple rituals, or suggesting alternative plumbing materials or complaining about how their lead-laced wine will kill them, you're going to attract the wrong kind of attention. And Roman attention often ends with shackles or a pit. So, start with the basics, speak only when spoken to. If someone asks you where you're from, give a vague answer. Beyond the mountains. From the Far East. Pick a direction and stick with it. Rome has conquered enough territory that nobody knows every village. Just sound humble, a little clueless, and very, very harmless. Don't try to explain anything. You're not here to revolutionize society. You are not the Steve Jobs of togas and aqueducts. Any attempt to modernize things will, at best, get you laughed at. At worst, it'll get you labeled a threat. Your weird phrases, ominous. Your wristwatch, sorcery. Your detailed knowledge of Roman history, suspicious. Your best move is to blend in. Learn quickly how to dress like the poor. That means drab tunics, no shoes if possible, and never, ever anything that makes you look like someone wealthy who lost their way. If you're seen as rich but acting poor, that raises questions. And in Rome, questions can be fatal. Next, your posture. Walk like you're used to being ignored. Keep your eyes down in public, especially around Roman citizens. Never speak first to someone better dressed than you. Do not interrupt. Never contradict. In ancient Rome, silence isn't just golden, it's self-defense. Food is another challenge. You don't get to be picky. If you can eat it without gagging, or dying immediately, do it. Whether it's barley gruel, stale bread dipped in wine, or questionable fish paste, don't complain. Complaining makes you look foreign. And foreign without wealth or a patron makes you vulnerable. Which brings us to the idea of patronage. This is your best ticket to not dying in a gutter. In Rome, every free man lower on the food chain needs a patronus, a patron. Someone more powerful who offers protection in exchange for loyalty. You're not likely to land a senator, but maybe a local merchant or mid-level official might take pity on you. Or find you useful. That usefulness could be labor, flattery, or simply being an obedient presence. Become indispensable, quietly. Avoid the law. Roman justice is swift and rarely in your favor. Theft, whipping or slavery. Insulting a citizen, jail, fines, or worse. Even looking suspicious can get you beaten by the lictors. Stay clean, stay unnoticed, and above all, stay boring. Don't volunteer information. Don't ask philosophical questions. Don't try to form a democracy among plebeians. Just listen, nod, agree, and say, yes, that's very wise. Even if they're talking about curing disease by wearing a dead weasel around your neck. Language is survival. Your Latin will be awkward. So stick to common phrases. Practice greetings. Learn how to ask for food, water, and directions. Avoid trying to recite Shakespeare or explain nuclear fission. It will only make you seem more alien. Find a role you can believably play. A mute servant. A wandering pilgrim. A half-wit shepherd. These aren't glamorous roles, but they'll keep you alive. No one expects a shepherd to know the square root of anything. If you seem strange, they'll attribute it to your simple origins rather than dark magic or sedition. Avoid politics entirely. Rome is a hotbed of rival factions, assassinations, and informants. You may be tempted to mention how Julius Caesar died. Don't. You never know who's listening or what year it actually is. You might be seen as a prophet or a conspirator. Both are fast tracks to execution. Instead, invest in small acts of blending. Learn the street layout. Know where the public fountains are. Which temples offer food to the poor? Which streets are dangerous after dark? Adapt to the pace of Roman life. Wake with the sun. Sleep when it sets. Light is expensive. Torches and candles are for the rich. Darkness is the great equalizer, and you'll want to be safely tucked away before it arrives. Keep your body language open but submissive. In Rome, posture is everything. Hands visible, head slightly bowed, movements slow. This says, I'm not a threat. I'm nobody. You'll be surprised how much that helps. Finally, embrace boredom. The less interesting you seem, the safer you are. Don't draw crowds. Don't tell stories. Don't share amazing truths from the future. Rome has plenty of fools and storytellers already. The ones who survive are quiet, predictable, and perfectly forgettable. That's your goal. Become a living footnote. Don't be the traveler from the stars. Be the guy who quietly cleaned the temple steps for food. Be the woman who sold pebbles to children pretending they were coins. Be the shadow in the crowd, the figure nobody notices, and the story no one remembers. Because in ancient Rome, survival isn't about greatness. It's about invisibility. And the sooner you learn to disappear, the longer you'll live. You thought you'd be a legend. You imagine stepping into Rome like a god among mortals. You'd introduce sanitation, flight, the periodic table, and maybe become emperor within a week. But that fantasy crumbles fast. Because in Rome, nobody cares about your TED Talks or your high school chemistry knowledge. They care about who owns you. And right now, that's someone else. Because congratulations, you're now a slave. Let's back up a bit. The Roman Empire had a generous and far-reaching policy regarding strangers. If you don't belong to someone, someone will make sure you do. You wandered into town alone. You couldn't speak proper Latin. You had no documents, no wealth, and no social proof. You were spotted by a patrol, or maybe by an opportunistic local. You were reported, detained, and quickly identified as a nobody. In Rome, a nobody is a potential slave. Roman slavery wasn't about race. It was about status, capture, birth, and economics. You could become a slave by being a prisoner of war, or by being born to a slave mother, or by being too poor to pay your debts, or, in your case, by being an unclaimed, undocumented, suspiciously uneducated foreigner. In other words, perfect slave material. So now you're shackled, taken to a slave market. Your modern clothes were stripped away, too strange, too foreign. Your body was inspected in public, teeth, muscles, scars. Questions you couldn't understand were asked. You tried to explain, maybe in English. That only made them laugh harder. Or worse, quiet down and look at you like a risk. At auction, you're sold quickly. You weren't expensive. No skills, no language, no guarantee of loyalty. Maybe a minor noble bought you as a curiosity. Maybe a merchant picked you up for grunt labor. Either way, you're now branded, literally. Branded or collared or both. A mark of ownership. A reminder that your body isn't yours anymore. At first, you resist. You think, I'll explain everything. They'll see I'm different. But you quickly learn that difference is not an asset here. The more unusual you are, the more you're distrusted. If you're lucky, you'll be ignored. If you're unlucky, your oddities will be interpreted as rebellion or insanity. And slaves don't get second chances. Your days now begin before dawn. If you're working in a field, you rise in the dark. You eat whatever scraps you're given, a chunk of bread, maybe olives or beans. Then you work until dusk. No breaks. No sitting. You plow, harvest, build, carry. All day, every day. Your muscles burn, your hands blister, your modern sense of labor rights evaporates. If you're lucky enough to be placed in a household, the rules are no less strict. You rise with your master. You clean, fetch, cook, polish. You are invisible unless something goes wrong. And when it does, it's your fault. There are no HR complaints, no overtime benefits, no sick leave. There is only punishment. You might try to use your modern knowledge. Maybe suggest a better way to wash clothes, or how to boil water for safety. But it backfires. Your masters assume you're challenging the way things are. They see arrogance. They hear defiance. A disobedient slave is a dangerous one. And dangerous things get whipped, shackled, or worse, crucified. So you stop speaking up. You mimic. You memorize the rhythms of daily chores. You adopt the posture of obedience. You nod when told, move when ordered, stay silent otherwise. It's not dignity, it's strategy. Because survival here isn't about being smart. It's about being small, quiet, invisible. Evenings bring no relief. You're not free to wander or rest where you choose. You sleep in the corner of a workshop, or in a communal slave room on straw. You are always under watch. Always at the mercy of someone else's whims. And the idea that you once had rights, that you could vote, own property, choose your job. That fades like a dream you can't quite remember. Some slaves are born into it. They know no other life. But you came from a world of hot showers, and fast food and Google. And now you're scrubbing vomit off a marble floor with a straw brush. You're hauling amphory for a man who won't remember your name. You're serving wine to guests who laugh in a language you barely speak. You are a footnote in someone else's life. Maybe one day you'll be manumitted. Freed. That happens sometimes. Slaves who are loyal, useful, unthreatening, they might be released. But even then, you're not really free. You become a liberatus, a freedman, but your former master still owns a piece of you. You owe them loyalty. You can't hold high office. People still see the brand, the past. You're free, but marked. And that's if you're lucky. Most slaves die as slaves. Unnamed. Unburied. Their lives written only in labor and pain. Their memories scattered like ash. You thought you'd come to Rome and change the world. Instead, the world changed you. It swallowed you whole. It filed off your uniqueness, crushed your pride, and replaced it with routine, servitude, and silence. Because Rome doesn't need your future. It needs your sweat. Your silence. Your obedience. You were once a citizen of the modern world. Now, you're property. And if you want to survive, you'd better get used to it.